Hi, welcome. It is 7 o'clock, and we are here, Select Board Public Meeting on the Punkatasset parking issues. And it's great to see all of you. This meeting is really for the public. We are holding it largely because the neighborhood requested a chance to talk about the issues specifically being brought forward, that you've produced a plan and some thoughts about parking along Monument Street. And we're here to listen and ask questions. So I'm just sitting here with bated breath. I think I'm staring at Nora because I think this is are you going to be the spokesman? I don't know how the neighborhood is organized right now.
We have three speakers tonight. Rich Churchill.
Okay.
Deliver some introductory remarks, and then I'll give the main presentation from the engineer Rosado.
Great. Rich, you can come up to the podium or you can stand there, whatever works for you, but you're having your back to everybody else and the good viewers on CCTV, because this is going to be, this is live and being recorded. See if is the light on? No. That would probably help.
Thank you, Ward. We need someone to point out the obvious.
Yes. If this seems onerous.
I can just talk louder. Yeah.
Well, that's not going to help the folks who are listening on CCTV. That's the only issue. So why don't you just grab a mic, and if you want to grab a chair, you're welcome to do that.
My name is Rich Churchill, and I live at 903 Monument Street. And I'd like to begin by assuring everyone that I don't plan on doing any Roy Orbison impersonations. I had cataract surgery earlier in the day. I also want to thank the Select Board for giving those of us who constitute the Punkatasset study group, which we affectionately refer to as the PSG, the opportunity to air our concerns about the NRC's proposed parking lot approximately 400 feet down the Punkatasset trailhead, as well as to give us the opportunity to air or present our alternative plan. Chris Wayland had indicated to me that we could take up to 30 minutes to present. Hopefully that's still the case. We're hoping, again, just in the interest of time, that we can hold questions in abeyance until after the presentation. Our plan recommends that the town undertake a number of low-cost improvements that would enable up to 12 cars to park safely on Monument Street. We use the phrase up to 12 cars because we do not believe that actual demand warrants this many spaces. This conclusion is based upon the results of a demand study that the PSG conducted over a 6-week period this fall. A total of 238 observations were recorded, and 88% of those noted that fewer than 6 cars parked at any one time. The PSG's plan was developed in consultation with Daniel Dulaski, a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Northeastern. As a baseline, before considering any improvements, Mr. Dulaski's report concluded that there presently exists more than sufficient space on the street to safely accommodate 12 parked cars. That conclusion was based upon his review and evaluation of existing site conditions and historical accident data. The PSG is recommending that the town implement the first tier of Mr. Dulaski's suggested improvements. These would require a negligible expenditure of funds. Mr. Dulaski's report lays out 2 additional tiers of possible site improvements. Those could increase safety, although he does not consider any of those improvements to be necessary. Before getting into specifics, I think it's worthwhile to summarize why these two options are now being considered by the Select Board. In November 2016, the Estabrook Woods Access Study Committee released its report on parking issues on Estabrook Road. One of its two highest priority recommendations was that the town and the trustees of the reservation work towards constructing a parking lot on the trustees' Apthorpe property adjacent to the trailhead. If that parking lot could not be built, the committee further recommended that the NRC work with the town's public safety staff and neighbors to provide safer parking at Punkatasset, including the possibility of site improvements to roadside parking and speed limits, and also, as well as to consider potential other off-street alternatives. When the town and the trustees could not reach agreement on a range of issues relating to the construction of the parking lot, the NRC focused exclusively on off-street alternatives. To the NRC's credit, it has recently shown a much greater willingness to listen to the PSG concerns about its off-street alternatives, and for that we are very appreciative. However, we do not believe that the NRC has formally rescinded its vote to recommend an off-street parking lot. Therefore, the PSG is proceeding on the basis that off-street parking remains an alternative, and accordingly, we will be critiquing this option in addition to outlining our own proposal. Nora Murphy will be presenting the PSG plan and the results of our demand study, and Joe Rosato will then deliver our critique of the NRC plan, focusing his comments on issues relating to public safety, intrusiveness to abutters, and maintenance. As you listen to our presentation, I would ask you to focus on one key element of the PSG plan, which I initially outlined in my letter to the Select Board on October 23rd. We have recommended that the town adopt our plan as a first step in addressing the safety and parking capacity issues that exist at the Punkatasset trailhead. Equally important as this first step, we recommend that the town establish a rigorous process to evaluate whether these improvements do in fact fully resolve safety and capacity issues. If that process uncovers deficiencies, the PSG wants the board to know that it will work cooperatively with the board and any other relevant town departments to find suitable solutions. It is critical to the PSG that we get this right. This is our neighborhood and we want to make it safe. And with that, I'll turn the meeting over to Nora.
I would like to invite the select board to.
You have to speak into the mic, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
This is because you're
Sure.
being televised.
And let people know who you are. because-
Sure, I'm Nora Murphy, and I live at 873 Monument Street. I have a brief presentation presenting the plan of the Punkatasset Study Group, which we developed in consultation with Daniel Delaski at Northeastern University. And I invite the Select Board to please take seats where you can see our presentation. And Erin, if you have your your clicker. Thank you. I'm sorry? I think I'm okay. Thank you. So the title of our presentation is Punkatasset Parking Works. So for many decades, there has been roadside parking at Punkatasset, similar to roadside parking all over New England and all over the United States. People are used to going to outdoor recreation areas, pulling over to the side of the road, and parking their cars. Some people view this roadside parking as unsafe. That's actually a good thing. When people view a risk as being present, they take greater caution. When people pull over and they park their cars at the side of the road, they recognize that traffic is passing, and they're careful. And when they have children in the car or dogs, they're careful in having their children or dogs get out of the car. And consequently, this parking has been sufficient for the demand in terms of the number of people who go to Punkatasset and hike there and take advantage of the beauty of nature and all of the resources there. And it's also been safe. This may contradict the beliefs of some people in the room. We consulted first with the Concord Police Department, who told us that they had no data of any accidents at Punkatasset over 5 years, for the previous 5 years. We wanted to dig deeper. So we went to the last 15 years of Mass Department of Transportation data to look for any accidents that had been reported at Punkatasset. And we also consulted with the police department to get additional records to make sure that we weren't missing anything. So we looked at the last 15 years of data and discovered, do I know how to advance this? Mm-hmm. Oh, we discovered there have been no accidents reported with the Department of Transportation or the Concord police data. I have to update. I didn't, that possibly one in 2008. We received data today from Jody Gary at Concord Police Department that in fact that one accident where someone hit a parked car in 2008 had nothing to do with the parking. It had to do with speeding on Monument Street. So in fact, there have been no accidents. And I do want to point out for those of you who are really data-driven and you notice the years on our graph only go back to 2012. That was our initial consideration, the last 5 years, but then we went back to 2002. So this calls into question, do we need a parking lot that's off-street? Because one of the arguments for having the off-street parking lot is that parking on the street is unsafe. However, the evidence suggests that people take care, and consequently, their choices, their behaviors make this parking area safe. So our second question would be, do we have enough parking? Because the Estabrook Woods Access Study Committee suggested that we needed 12 spaces at Punkatasset in order to meet the demand of people who come and enjoy the space there. We decided, oh, I'm sorry, I'm still on safety, I apologize. I should be following my slide notes here. Thinking of safety, I apologize, back to safety. So thinking of safety, why is it safe? The Concord Public Works Department did a study back in August of 2017, just a few months ago, and they found that the stopping distance, sight distance, is adequate for stopping on Monument Street, that the general SSD is met and also the vertical crest curvature SSD is met, meaning that there's a curve in the road at the site, which for some people they view that as, oh, there's a curve in the road that makes the parking less safe there. But interestingly, because there's a curve in the road, people naturally have to slow there. And in fact, when our engineer came and did a site visit and did some study, took some data with a radar gun, he found that people had to slow to about 20 to 32 miles per hour around that curve, which is much lower than the speed limit, the 20 miles per hour, certainly. So data from our own Concord Public Works, as well as Concord Police show, and Mass Department of Transportation show that this area is safe and also why it's safe. This is showing the number of cars that pass, the volume on a typical weekday, on Monument Street near Hutchins Farm. And here we find that during the peak hours when people visit Punkatasset, there are only about 2 vehicles per minute that pass on a typical weekday, which makes it easy to parallel park. So one question that's come up at a couple of meetings is it easy to parallel park? Are there risks for people there? And in fact, also on a typical weekend day, same location, this is a study done in 2015 by the Concord Police, they found on a typical weekend day, where we tend to have more visitors to Punkatasset, there are fewer than 3 vehicles per minute. So again, easy to parallel park. If it takes you 10 seconds or 15 seconds to parallel park, and there are only 3 cars passing in a minute, you might not even see any of those cars while you're parallel parking. So this reinforces why there's no accident data over the last 15 years. Because the sight distance is adequate for people to see oncoming vehicles, and the volume of cars that are passing is low enough that people can park easily and safely. Here, we went out to park some cars one day because the engineer's study for Concord Public Works suggested that there was room for fewer cars than 12. So here you can see a number of cars parked. The one in the very front is at a location that we don't recommend actually as a future site. The two that you can see that are separate are in front of 851 Monument, and then the four that you can see closest to us are in front of 873, and then a different view of those same cars in front of 851 and 873. And then you can see that cars parked, that red truck is in front of 873, and down farther you can see a bit of a gap and then some additional cars, and those cars park in front of 903 Monument. And there are currently spaces in front of 903 Monument, which some people don't use, and typically people don't use if there are spaces that are open closer, but we find on peak use days people do park there. And these are showing current conditions, so you can see that cars are parked off of the roadway itself, and they're parked fully on the shoulder. So there is 7 feet of width for parking, and in some places more. And 7 feet is the width that I think is the regulation for a parking space width. So theoretically it exists already, but we argue that there are some improvements that could be made to make that parking width a little greater, which I'll explain in a moment. So with the help of Daniel Dulaski, we mapped out not only 12 spaces, but potentially 14 spaces in front of 851, which is down in the lower left corner, 873, which is in the middle, and then 903, which is up in the upper right. And so you can see these 14 safe spaces that already exist based on regulations for what a space should look like in terms of length and width. There are some, a telephone pole, a utility box, a couple of other items that were noted in the Department of Public Works study last summer, but our engineer pointed out that that's typical of any public area and that they could be protected. There's no evidence there's been any injury, so it appears that people have figured out how to park safely around them. There are no dents, there are no bangs. However, if the town wanted to protect them, they could put in some bollards or other protective devices. And those are located in front of 873. I don't know if I don't think we need to point them out on the map. I don't know if we need to point them out. If people have questions afterwards, we'd be happy to. So demand is satisfied. We have 14 cars. So probably some of you have been wondering why some spaces are highlighted in blue and green. Well, interestingly, those of you who were attending carefully to Rich's introduction, you might have heard that in fact most of the time we need far fewer than 12 spaces. So a demand study had not been done prior to the proposal of having an off-street parking lot. We decided to do our own demand study because nobody knew how many cars parked at Punkatasset on any particular day. So here is a summary of results from our demand study. So we collected data for 42 different days over 6 weeks. And this was from the end of September through the beginning of November. And I'd like to remind you, because now it's very cold and you've probably forgotten, but October was like summertime. And there were some weekend days during October when it was just gorgeous. So we felt that this was really kind of a peak time. The early fall is a time when a lot of people come out to walk at Punkatasset. The total number of data points that we collected were 238. And what we found is shown in this graph. So weekdays are in red or pink, Saturdays are in purple, and Sundays are in green. And the vertical axis is the number of parked vehicles, the average for different time periods. So we divided up our data into 3 sections. 6 to 10 a.m., fewer cars, one would expect that. 10 to 2 p.m., greater volume. 2 to 6 p.m. on weekends, still pretty high volume. And what we found, however, is 78% of the time, 4 or fewer vehicles are parked at Punkatasset on any of these days, at any of these times. And in fact, 88% of the time, there are 6 or fewer vehicles, which means almost 90% of the time we really only need 6 parking spots there. Only 5% of the time were there more than 8 vehicles. So in thinking of the number of parking spots that we need at Punkatasset, we are mostly going to be using 6 parking spots 90% of the time. And then on certain days, I think the highest volume that we measured were 13 cars on one particular day. And I think outside of our demand study time period, we did observe a day with 15 cars. So certainly beautiful days bring people out. But I think the town needs to consider, are we creating parking spaces for the majority of the time versus we need to create enough parking spaces for that one day when Harvard University brings out a whole class of introductory entomology students to look for some rare species. So our demand study suggests that 88% of the time there are 6 vehicles or fewer. So our engineer was very helpful in guiding us to considering some improvements to the roadway. And we've identified some short-term, low-cost improvements that we think would make parking at Punkatasset safer. So for example, some concerns have been raised about people parking with their tires in the roadway itself. For $150 or so each, we could add a couple of signs guiding people in terms of parking. A similar concern has been raised about people parking in the wrong direction. So currently there are no signs guiding any parking, except for one sign that's inappropriately placed that says no parking here at a corner, that truthfully needs to be removed because it was put in the wrong location. So that's one possibility. We also discovered, with the help of the engineer, that by adding edge lines to create 11-foot wide travel lanes, we can actually add 3+ feet to the shoulder as it exists already. So simply by going out, a good portion of Monument Street in that area is about 28 feet wide. And so when we went out and we looked at the position, without even moving the double yellow lines, by simply putting in white edge lines, we can add a good piece to the shoulder. In truth, we could also move the double yellow line, which isn't centered on Monument Street, to get even more distance if we wanted to add to the shoulder to just give people a little more space where they're parking. So this is a near-term improvement that we can pursue. It's very inexpensive. It's only about 50 cents to $1 per foot of painting lines. Some midterm improvements. Say we try that and the town decides we would like to try to control speed a little better on Monument Street, because sometimes people travel quickly. It can be a commuter way. Digital speed limit signs mounted to posts are about $3,000 a piece. So we could put in 2 of those for about $6,000. The select board also has the option, under a regulation that was passed in 2016, that they could establish a safety zone, which the state of Massachusetts developed in order to provide safer areas for places like Punkatasset, where there are a lot of pedestrians and a lot of traffic. Lastly, we could move the stone wall. If there were a desire to create, say, a walkway inside of the cars so people could park and then they could get out and they could walk alongside the inside of their cars towards Punkatasset, we could move the stone wall at 873 Monument Street to create even more space for cars to park along the roadway safely and for people, their children, and their dogs to get out safely and to walk safely to enjoy Punkatasset. So this ends the presentation of our improvements, and I'm going to invite Joe Rosato to speak a little bit and critique some aspects of the off-street parking lot that we have concerns about. And then I think I'll come back to wrap things up.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Rosato, and I am, and my family are residents at 873R Monument Street.
Voice up if you can, please.
Certainly. Thank you. And I've been there for 9+ years, and I believe Nora, who just presented, and Ward have been there for 10+ years. And along with other members of our neighborhood community, we had quite a comprehensive list of safety concerns in these 3 different categories of just general, public, and resident safety hazards, abutter disruption, and maintenance costs and concerns due to the changes that would be incurred if one of the proposals for off-street parking were to be implemented. And so this is an abbreviated list. If you have any desire to have a written copy of it, they're up back, and I'm sure any one of us would be able to provide lots of stories in more detail if desired.
And just for a second, Joe and Nora and neighbors, in fairness to the viewing audience and others in the room, the NRC's drafts haven't been shared widely, so this is a little, not everybody knows what's being discussed. So if we can sort of be concise, but also be specific in terms of what you're concerned about. I mean, because we can't really do a point by point since we don't have those available, and the NRC isn't, that's not what this is about tonight.
Well, our proposition is in contrast. We feel it's a more manageable, fiscally responsible approach.
And that's
so
just
we're
highlight
just going to
those pieces,
abbreviate
but
the
understand
pieces.
that other people don't know what you're comparing your proposition to.
Okay, thank you very much. And we do have information available if anyone is interested in contacting us. We're happy to provide documentation on that. So we'll start with the safety hazards regarding the off-street parking proposals. And these are both to private residents and public visitors of Punkatasset. So the parking proposals, yes.
So Jane, in answer to your issue,
Thank you.
we can just quickly summarize at least what our understanding is of the NRC proposal, which is approximately 400 or 500 feet down the Punkatasset trailhead in back of the White's property at 851. The NRC has proposed to build a rectangular parking lot that can accommodate 12 cars. And to get to that parking lot, they are proposing modifying the existing easement, which is just, it's a 28-foot easement that presently really only allows one vehicle, and widen it to allow 2 vehicles to pass in either direction.
Thanks.
Thank you. So our driveway, our private driveway abuts and shares a right of easement or right of access over this easement that the proposed parking lot is would be on. So the safety hazards are the potential for illegal and disruptive activity in a lot that is not visible from the road, in combination with prior history of illicit and illegal activities at Punkatasset. Residents have observed unauthorized public use during closed hours, night hiking, biking with headlamps, construction of rustic shelters, and unauthorized camping and campfires. The Concord Police Chief stated that they do not have the resources to gate or chain the parking lot or the easement, to patrol or monitor the parking area. The one possible exception they offered was for a patrol car to pass along Monument Street once per day, but not the lot itself. And unfortunately, the lot would not be visible from the street. So the Concord Police and NRC also stated that residents are expected to monitor for unsafe and illegal activity and report incidents to the police. This would be a daily imposition on abutters, and it provides no preventative measures. And also requests to use active or recorded camera surveillance were declined. Abutter disruption issues are the parking access and the parking lot's proximity to private residences. With that, there would be an increase of noise daily with 100 vehicle passes per day. Actually, the studies show there's 50 passes per day, but they have to come in and out. So there's a total of 100. Disturbances to our privacy, increases to the vulnerability of private property that's adjacent in open carports and in our yards, the potential for public to illegally park in the adjoining private driveway due to confusion, disturbs the conservation of the natural wooded areas and the scenic views that Concord citizens desire to share and enjoy responsibly. The town's proposed change of use along the easement from a primarily pedestrian way into a public roadway would introduce a flow of daily vehicle traffic from multiple directions that would cause passing between our private yards and play areas for our children, exposing them to danger. There would also be an increase in potential for accidents and collisions, one by increasing the potential for rear-end collisions on Monument Street, where visitors stopping short to make the entrance and negotiate with other vehicles entering or exiting from the opposing directions, as opposed to having the whole length of the parking area to stop slowly and turn around, as it does exist now. Also, accidents could involve resident or visitor pedestrians, their children, their dogs, or their vehicles. And it would severely worsen an existing bottleneck condition along the easement by introducing two vehicles at the same time. And this could create potential for a roadblock along the easement, which would interfere with the resident, visitor, utility vehicle, delivery, or emergency vehicle access throughout the day. And these disruptions present a real safety concern that would be alarmingly magnified by snow and ice in unsafe winter conditions. And that brings me to our third category, and our final, maintenance costs and concerns. The town of Concord has routinely sought to wisely minimize maintenance costs in the stewardship of its natural and recreation areas. Introducing these off-street parking proposals at Punkatasset would necessitate significant annual maintenance costs due to the unalterable nature and complexity of the site, the necessity to commit to a comprehensive and timely snow removal plan that would ensure the two-way thoroughfare remains safe and passable at all times when the public has unrestricted access to the easement and parking area. The expedited degradation of the natural roadway and parking area from increased daily vehicle use and wear and tear from winter elements and plowing would also incur cost. The need for periodic but timely removal of substantial fallen dead limbs and leaves that would impede access and create a safety hazard on the public roadway. And also, the town has not provided a specific and sustainable maintenance plan, a budget, or funding plan for these things. And the NRC has stated that it is not in their budget to actively maintain any of its off-street parking proposals at Punkatasset. The DPW director has also affirmed its inability to fund ongoing maintenance. So these are all reasons why we are eager to work with the select board and the town to continue to create safety in an area that's beloved and enjoyed by many. So I will let Nora close.
Thank you.
And just, excuse me, just quickly to wrap up, we encourage the town to work with what we already have. The current system's working. Historic data shows that it's safe. The supply is adequate. And we also can make some inexpensive improvements, low-cost incremental changes that can be monitored over time to see how well they work and how well they're serving the needs of people who are enjoying Punkatasset. That is our strong recommendation, the conclusion that we've reached as a neighborhood group. And we received support from the engineer who we worked with from Northeastern, who unfortunately could not come tonight. So I do want to emphasize that while we will do our very best to answer all questions that you have, none of us in the group are engineers. So we might need to, if you have some very specific questions, we might need to save them and pass them along to Daniel Dulaski, who is very happy to talk with you or Department of Public Works or anyone in the town.
You know, there may be questions that either Rich or Bill may want to discuss directly.
Yes, and we're happy to arrange that. So thank you so much for providing this time tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to present our proposal.
Okay, so at this point, I want to invite the select board back so that we can start with any questions or comments. And then obviously this is a public meeting, so we'll look to the public for your input as well. So I want to offer it to my fellow select board members. I know that the issues of safety and expense and the number of cars we can actually fit along Monument Road has been high in everybody's priority list. Does anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start. First, I want to thank the Nora and our colleague Joseph and Richard. Rich? I think I have everybody's name. I thought that was a very good and informative presentation. I really appreciated hearing that. I have a couple of background questions. Can you tell me who the Punkatasset Study Group is? That's the first question.
If, I would ask the selectmen to refer to my letter to the select board on October 23rd, and at the end of that letter, I listed all of the individuals. It was a total of 18 people.
Okay, I have a final letter. Is that?
October 23rd.
So these are, I don't know, I don't have it in front of me. I can't seem to pull it out. Guess we don't have much coverage.
I can list the individuals.
These are all neighbors living on Monument Street? Are they?
With the sole exception of Lansing Old, which I'm not sure
I
exactly
know
where
Lansing.
Lansing lives.
Okay. So I thought it was useful to see the distribution of peak times when cars are parked on Monument Street. I'm curious whether you have any anecdotal information from having lived there for the number of years that you have. What happens in the winter? You know, we saw a lot of photos early on when we were looking at the Estabrook Road conundrum, and winter parking is very different than summer parking. I'm just wondering if you have any anecdotal thoughts about what it's like in the wintertime. On-street
On the
parking.
street,
So the photos
right.
that you showed us and the drawings that you showed us for on-street parking are, were really helpful, but I don't have a sense of what happens in the wintertime when there's a lot of snow and a lot of skiers want to be able to come in that entrance to go cross-country skiing.
Well, that's a definite issue, because the town has not been willing to plow out the shoulder in front of these spaces. So, as Joe indicated, snow is going to be a major issue no matter which plan is adopted. One of the things that is particularly troublesome to me in the two parking lane scenario is that easement, the plowing of that is the responsibility of the trustees of the reservation, because they control that easement. It's when the question has been put to the NRC, how are you going to ever insist that the trustees plow for 2 lanes of traffic? We haven't gotten a good answer. So whether it's the trustees or the town that maintains during the winter that parking lot and the easement, that's going to be an issue, just as the current situation is also an issue.
So I understand that you have a position and an interest in the outcome of a parking arrangement. That's not the question I asked, really. I was just asking, do you have 14 cars a day in the winter parking? Is there enough room for on the road on Monument Street? Are they parking parallel? What happens to the traffic during that time? There's good data I've seen from the last 6 weeks. I'm glad that you did that analysis. I'm just curious if you have a thought about winter. Is it compounded? Is it a big problem? Do we have to worry about, aside from plowing?
Sure. No, it's a reasonable, very reasonable question. Ward Cheney, 873 Monument, and I'm married to Nora. And
Or just because there are people watching and they don't know who you are, you might want to just identify yourself for the,
I just did. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I'll do it again. The Ward Cheney, 873 Monument. And so we are where the Apthorps used to live, and we're right at the end of the dirt access road that goes into Punkatasset. And I can tell you just from, during the winter when there's been a heavy snow, and usually what happens is that the Public Works, makes its initial passes. Their obligation obviously is just to the general traffic flowing in and out of Monument Street. So they just tend to push the snow off to the side. And what I found is often it just fills in, the photographs that you saw of the rock wall, and then there's kind of a dirt shoulder, and then the pavement. That gets filled up very quickly. And if it gets filled up right to the street, then there's really very few people come and park there. It's the kind of thing that if you get your front wheels stuck in there, it's very difficult to get out. I used to work for 9 years at Hutchins Farm, and occasionally I would bring a tractor over with a bucket, and I would try to move snow away, but it would never, it's a big job, and I couldn't sufficiently move enough snow to provide parking for everybody that would be there. And I know just from my experience of going out and trying to keep our mailbox open enough so that the post mistress, in our case, could deliver mail. Some of the winters when it's just awful. Exactly, when it's just awful. I mean, I'm out there shoveling for 45 minutes just to try to get a space for the woman to be able to pull in. So, as Rich said, it does seem that the obligation of the Public Works is to keep main traffic flowing. And it's been our experience that only rarely after storms kind of die down and most everything else, sometimes they'll come and push a secondary pass and try to push the snow out. But most of the time it doesn't go all the way to the stone wall.
So what do people do? Yeah.
So a lot of time, most of the time, people just end up not parking there. And I've actually seen some of the photographs of the Estabrook Woods taken over on Estabrook Road. And honestly, I was just amazed at the number of cars that were parked there. Regardless of what I feel about all that's going on there, I just was amazed that you could see probably 20 cars parked along Estabrook Woods, the Estabrook Road there. Sometimes if somebody pushes a little bit of snow in, then people can get it far enough over, but it's just not, it doesn't happen often, is my experience.
So it's less used in the winter?
It would be definitely less used, though I have seen what often has happened is that parents, kids love going to the ski slope and sliding down the ski slope. So from our vantage at our house, we can see a lot that's going on, and you'll see a car stop and a lot of kids jump out with the little sleds and the round, rubber things they go down the hill on, and then they'll just come in, and in a day of smartphones, they probably just call their parents and they come and.
So there's a drop-off?
There's a drop-off, yeah, and it's usually right where the dirt access road, enters into Monument Street, and that's a kind of a common thing that they do.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Alice, the fact that I don't think there's accidents recorded, even in, say, a snow situation or an ice situation on that road, is telling to whether the activity drops. Perhaps it's not a point of interest for cross-country activity, or just there's enough room somehow.
So that was my question. Having not, I've skied those woods quite a lot myself. I was just curious whether Monument Street has that same appearance as Estabrook Road did, with cars parking haphazardly, both directions, angle parking, parallel parking. It doesn't sound like that happens. The snow is more of a deterrent than.
I would say it does still happen. I have seen plenty of that. It depends on the amount of snow. If there are high banks, obviously it's more of a deterrent. But
6 inches.
I'm just
when
trying to get an
people
idea
are
of
able-
what is the situation like in the winter? Because when we design a plan, if we go with a plan similar to what you've described, it's based on summer use data, and we have to deal with a year-round plan. So I was just trying to get an idea, if we have on-street parking, what's your knowledge, your working knowledge of the winter conditions of parking? Does it appear in the way that the Esbrook Road does? And it sounds like that's not the case.
People do still attempt to park there. And in fact, if we plow out our mailbox, that's one of the first places where they'll pull in.
We all do, because we
So
take
if
mail
the
with
snow
us.
is removed, people will park there. I believe, as Ward said, people are only not parking there because the town doesn't currently take the responsibility to plow it for whatever reason. And as we've stated, that would be the case, with the driveway, or the access road as well. And we have experienced with that the snowbanks get very high there. It's hard to keep pushing snow without great effort and planning. And those are part of the additional costs that I don't think the trustees would take on, and part of the safety concerns if you're going to invite the public to access it in all seasons, then the winter concerns are what really magnify.
I'm not
Problem
talking
being
about
blocked in.
off-street parking. I'm only talking about the conditions on Monument Street so that we can get a current state picture of what we're talking about. I'm not arguing for one position or another.
Lansing Old, 607 Lowell Road. DPW has never plowed along the side of the road there.
Okay,
And for years, I did it.
okay. Thank you.
And so that's why the parking has not been.
Are you offering to continue to do that?
Well, if you'll assume the liability.
Did you assume the liability?
And the liability results from if I don't plow properly and somebody gets hurt there.
Sure.
Right. But it sounds like you've been doing it for years.
Ever been sued?
I probably plowed it for 10 years.
Yeah.
DPW never plows.
Okay, thank you.
There must be a reason.
We appreciate those 10 years. So I was just curious if you wanted to continue.
Very quickly, as Rich said in his letters, one of the things is to try it out and to try to maintain some sort of record. I mean, our demand study, a number of us just went out and took photographs. So I think it's a very reasonable question, what is actually there, so.
Thanks.
Ellie Bemis, 858 Monument Street. It seems if we want to improve the parking and make it safer, the best money the town could spend is plowing it in the winter. Yes, people love to go to Punkatasset and cross-country ski, so I would say that's where we should put our money.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie.
And I
Did you
think
have
we
a-
should allow the abutters who have mailboxes out there to put a lawn chair out there to hold their mailbox spot for the Postal
That's a
Service.
good point.
Just wanted to add that.
Nobody has mentioned in this description, in order to park in the way people are talking along Monument Street, people have to take a U-turn somewhere. And I'm not sure how that's done. That's definitely a safety problem that nobody's talked about.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Nora Murphy, 873 Monument. That is a wonderful question, which has come up many times. We have considered that. The historic data on accidents suggests that people who are parking at Monument Street and make decisions when they're driving and parking, much like all of us do when we're driving and parking anywhere, and that they have found solutions to reverse direction. So if they're coming out of town and they want to park facing into town, they find one of the easements, do a three-point turn when traffic is not passing, and they successfully reverse direction and park. Or they go to someone's driveway and reverse direction and park. And while, again, it might seem that it is too dangerous to make that turn, the historic data suggests that people have been figuring out ways to do that successfully. And since I live at 873, where the south easement, as we call it, leads to my driveway, I see people making that maneuver all of the time. We did speak to the engineer, and something the town could consider. There are some minor changes that could be made to the north easement that might facilitate making that a little easier for people to do a turnaround. And we have some information about that if the select board is interested. Thank you.
Thanks. Mike, did you have a question?
I would just like to make a couple of comments at this point. When we had the hearing on the parking for the town, one of the first issues that came up is, what are we trying to accomplish? And the sense I'm getting, and I must say we have not heard yet from the town staff or committee, but there's a sense that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And my major concern, I have three concerns regarding this issue. The first one, and by far the most dominant one, is safety. And I want to thank the committee for addressing that very much head-on and doing really an excellent job, I think. I don't know whether we'll get a different perspective on that when we get further comments. The second is the issue of cost, and I think you also addressed that in terms of what the ongoing cost might be and what some of the benefits. The third one is access, and I think that's probably more of an open issue because we just don't know some of the other pieces that will fall into place, but I think an effort was made to address that as well. So I think at this point I really want to compliment you in terms of addressing those, particularly the safety issue, because I think that that's the critical issue. I'm concerned when I hear that people are going to be crossing a street that has public traffic and has children and has animals and whatever else, that there is a potential problem. But I think you also addressed that there are safety issues with the alternative as well. And those, I think, are not something that I had kind of been aware of or thought of. So I do appreciate the efforts that you all have made. I think it's been a very thorough approach.
Thanks to all of you for the hard work you did. I have some, these are really questions. So the first is, do you have the, I'd just like to see it, it's not an argument with you. Do you have the detailed data for how many cars were there? The averages are fine, the variances would be more interesting to me, but, and I don't want them now, but if I can just get, I'd just like to see what they look like.
It's been provided to you. Huh? It's been provided to you in the package materials.
Nope, not mine. Yeah, and it's not an issue, we're just curious more than anything.
Yeah, we have that, yeah.
The drawing that you provided in the package that Nora, you sent me, I think, was interesting, but it wasn't an engineering drawing. It looked like a town drawing to me with parking spots drawn in. So did this engineer that you guys have used, did he do an engineering drawing? Do you know?
Nora Murphy, 873 Monument again. The drawing that we used to overlay the parking spots on is actually a drawing completed by Nathan Chin as part of the Concord Department of Public Works study in August of 2017. And we chose to do that because we were working under kind of a tight timetable with Thanksgiving thrown in as well with our engineer. And so consequently, he did not do an engineering sketch of the area. However, he did a site visit and evaluated all of those spots. So while it's not a formal engineering drawing, it reflects his professional opinion that there are 14 safe spots along the street. Does that answer your question satisfactorily? And he'd be happy to speak to you more about that.
No, this follow-up question to that is, what lengths were you including? Because I couldn't make sense of it, the scale.
Right.
Sure. The spots were 20 feet long.
Really?
I think so.
Every one of them?
18 to 20 feet.
18 to 20?
Well, that surprises me. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Then, I know you talked about near-term, intermediate term, and longer term, and you outlined a couple costs for the early ones, line painting and signs.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you got to the, wasn't even a longer term, but a potential to increase the width of the street parking by moving the walls, did you guys do any estimates of what that might cost the town? Great.
We did, in fact. I mean, I will mention that, you know, thinking of some of the nearer term, low-cost options,
Yeah,
we could gain some footage simply by painting some lines. But Peter will speak to the estimates we got on moving the wall, or removing the wall.
great, thank you.
Peter Gifford, 1171 Monument Street. I did get some estimates for two things. One was moving the wall approximately 5 feet to the west. The next one was for actually removing the wall entirely. The estimate for relocating the wall was $27,500.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that number?
27,500.
And that, Peter, is that for the whole length of where you
100
laid out the 14 spots?
No, because it's the length between the south and north easements,
So between.
in front of
Oh, so-
873.
Right.
Not in front of the Wright's house and not in front of churches?
No, only in front of the trustees of reservations.
Okay.
Got it.
Yep.
And I was clear with the stonemason to tell him that chances are that he would have to do his work from the street side.
Yeah.
Because unless the trustees gives us the right to access their property, it's always easier to build a wall from below instead of above. And if the wall did get moved over, I calculated that it would roughly need 88 cubic yards of fill to increase the
up.
shoulder. And that's a pretty rough estimate in many ways, only because the land tapers.
Sure.
Right.
And the cost for that fill would be $2,000, give or take, delivered.
Is that inside the 27,500, or is this in addition?
Oh,
That's in addition.
Okay. Yep.
If the wall was to be removed, the cost would be $4,570 to physically take the wall away. The stonemason would take the stones.
Yeah. And then they'd fill it.
And then you would fill in, which would require more fill because now you have to taper it down.
Right, sure.
So I had a figure of
Maybe-
$3,000 for that amount of fill. And these were all based on the stone wall being reconstructed basically as you see it today. It was not intended to be a fancy wall or anything like that. It was also based on the fact that the town would take down the underbrush and any interfering trees, basically get the site ready to go. And that may be moving signs. It would be taking out any stumps that were going to be in the way. And then, the person from whom I got the estimates was Stan Nobles of Noble Stonemasonry, who I believe all of you are familiar with. He did the Haywood Meadow wall at the
Sure.
gun house, and he repaired the wall that got, unfortunately,
Just got whacked.
compromised this summer. So he's a known quantity to all of you. He was interested in the job if it should come up. And
Thanks, Peter, that's helpful. Appreciate it.
And that was the cost of the fill delivered to site, but the town actually
Cleans it.
putting it in place and compacting it.
Yeah.
If there's anything more that I can help you on.
That's good, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Appreciate that work.
And those are strictly estimates.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, we understand.
No,
but I
it's a
appreciate-
ballpark.
Right,
Yep.
right, right.
I appreciate that.
Sure. Just to add to what Peter said, the engineer also commented that because the width of Monument Street is inconsistent, should the town decide to move the wall, parts of the wall might not need to be moved. So in examining this as a possible change, you know, it should be looked at very carefully because it might be that just part of the wall would need to be adjusted to improve some of the parking.
Abby White, 851 Monument Street. We did some work that might be helpful to you, just as far as the estimates go. So we have about 173 feet of frontage with 35 plus 22 of it that are curb cuts. So we moved the portion of the wall that's in front of the two spaces that you saw on the map. That was moved and tidied up, and the curb cuts were changed, the locations were changed, so a significant portion of our 173 feet was moved for about $8,000.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the number?
$8,000. And that was just rejiggering the wall, pushing it back, which now that's kind of a favored spot because it has an extra 3 or 4 feet.
And about how many yards, is that 2 parking spaces? I mean, what's the general, just to get a apples to apples comparison? 8,000, in other words, what you
The
moved.
2 parking spaces?
Yeah, is that, I mean, I'm trying to, if we're going to compare the price that you're offering on what you've done.
Right, so the price, the $8,000 included moving the stone for almost the entire 175 feet because it turned a
That's what I
corner.
mean, yep.
So it was the frontage minus part of the frontage plus
Okay.
down the easement. So I would say it was roughly 170 feet of rejiggering the stone wall.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Adding of the edge line was, I'm sorry, I forgot what the cost of that was, to put an edge line along.
I don't-
Did we get a cost on that?
Nora Murphy, 873 Monument Street. The engineer estimated about 50 cents to $1 per foot for adding the
painting.
edge line.
For painting?
For painting the edge line, I guess measuring
And $3,000 a sign for
for the digital
speed
signs.
signs?
And about 150 for informational signs.
So
That would also add safety for bikers and other people as well, so it seems to be a logical thing we might want to move for.
Sure.
don't go away.
You're right.
Oh, I just have just a very picky question, but I think I wrote it to you as well. The engineer that you hired, we got an extensive resume from him, which was helpful. And then we got the report. The report was on a professional engineering firm's stationery. Was he doing that as an employee of the engineering firm, so it's their representation plus his, or just his representation and you use the stationery? I mean, I just want to be clear.
He was working independently, but he does consulting with them. So he said I could say that he is a consultant with
But it's
that
not the firm representing this information,
No,
it's
it
him.
is him. It
Okay,
is him.
great.
Yes.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
I have one other question. I didn't hear it mentioned. I'm just curious whether it came up in your conversations with Mr. Dulowski, Dr. Dulowski, whether there was consideration given to traffic calming in the area that would slow cars down as opposed to having multiple signs posted in the area. I'm just curious whether he had an opinion about that.
His viewpoint seemed to be, and please other members of the group speak up if you have a differing opinion. It seemed to be that people drive the speed that they can. That typically, speed limits are set based on what 85% of cars are driving, for example. So if a study is done and it's found that, 85% of cars are driving 35 miles per hour, then that somehow serves as the basis for this should be the speed limit for this piece of road. So, I know that, a traffic calming measure, say like putting a speed bump there would not work, say for snow removal during wintertime. Having a traffic calming measure like a safety zone, changing the speed limit to 20 miles per hour is an option for the select board. The question remains, and certainly we'd want to study it, would people actually adhere to that? Or would they continue to drive 30 to 35 miles per hour, or even 30 to 45 miles per hour if they're in a hurry? Around the curve, they probably slow down. Unless there's police enforcement, some of the passive signs seem to be less effective. However, digital signs that provide a reminder of you are driving X and you should be driving Y potentially are more dynamic, and so draw people's attention and maybe have a little more impact.
I was just curious whether he had an opinion about that. Okay, thank you.
Is that
Yeah, and then
helpful?
adding the markings on the road, the stripe, which is narrowing the driving area, also helps. That's a pretty typical tool to use for traffic.
We heard about this parking calming with respect to the lack of cars on Main Street, that with the cars not parking on Main Street because we got that pay-by-phone thing that the people have been going faster
Right,
down
There
there.
are fewer cars, yeah.
right.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I just wanted to thank you all for, again, I'm with my fellow select board members for presenting such a comprehensive study of the idea you have about parking in the street. I think it's amazing that in some neighborhoods, certain residents hate having cars park in front of their property. You know, they would rather have a remote lot somewhere, and in this case, it's just a little different. I mean, that's fine. I can understand that. I think the ideas to widen the spaces seem rational, and it would be a shame to have to move that stone wall, but that's how probably you could resolve the snow removal issue with this particular scenario. And probably that width will give you that little bit more safety for cars pulling over. I've only, my apologies, but I've only approached the entrance by bike, and it's always uphill. So I really watch all the cars there lately, since this has been kind of on everyone's agenda. And I have to say, the report feels accurate, like the number of cars on a Saturday, Sunday versus end of day. Feels about the right density. I've never seen anyone park on the other side of the street or even making U-turns. I haven't had to witness that, so I think that's it's just my anecdotal evidence. So I think it's something for us to consider. The stone wall shifting is probably an engineering type event that we'll have to consider in that. That's probably part of the cost and the snow removal, but, you know, I've never seen more than probably 14 cars in that area, so maybe, you know, something to consider.
Any other?
I'd like to say that I think taking a U-turn on Monument Street is inherently a very dangerous maneuver.
Dumb idea.
And that having a parking lot that people could just drive into is a much safer alternative in terms of traffic. And I think another way to resolve the pressure is to increase the parking on Estabrook Road. I was horrified when the select board decided to have the parking on Estabrook Road because a few residents complained. I think you did not do a service to the residents of the town.
Thank
You were
you.
disloyal to everybody, in my opinion.
Thank you.
But I think the next item on our agenda is to hear from the town and staff, though, before we go to
wait.
public comments.
Oh,
Well, at least according to this agenda. We haven't heard from town staff.
Right.
okay.
I don't know.
I just wanted to quantify what Abby White said about her removal of her stone wall for approximately the same number of feet. The nature of the wall that we're talking about for Punkatasset is a retaining wall. I believe theirs was a freestanding, quote, farmer's wall. Right. Put together entirely different, constructed. It's more difficult, and the town Punkatasset wall is much wider, and you also have the trees with which to deal.
Big trees.
So I could see all of you saying, gee, well, that's a big difference in price for about the same.
Well, and obviously, before anything happened, we'd be getting these things far more defined. But I think Mike's right. I know, I see Kathy, she's.
Well, it's just, it wasn't clear to me what the process is for commenting on, for people who weren't involved in the study group to comment on the study group. So I can make those comments now if you want next to that. If you want to do the staff, then I'll come back and make the comments later. But it pertains to what we've just heard, so let me know what the process is.
Why don't you take the moment, and then we'll pull the staff's comments up.
Okay. So I just have a few comments as I've heard this going through. This is, Kathy Angel. I live at 267 Main Street.
Thanks.
I was unfamiliar with this proposal, so these are just comments I have based on solely what I've heard this evening. First of all, I was pretty astonished to have a proposal that starts out saying it's a good thing if people think something is unsafe. That doesn't seem the way we usually do things in Concord, so that was just a little surprising as a premise. I'm not necessarily against or for a lot of the things they suggested. Clearly, a lot of thought went in, but these are just a few comments, observations I have. There was a comment that the 14 spaces are enough capacity. The drawing had cars very neatly lined up. My experience is whenever you're parking on a dirt shoulder and there are no lines and nothing delineating the spaces, it's extremely rare that cars park perfectly, and so whatever nice drawing there is of capacity, it's actually considerably less to that, particularly, if the first 3 cars park badly, then the rest of it is impossible to park well. I appreciated the questions that some of you asked about the parking for peak times, which is really, I think, an important part of the experience in Concord, people wanting to go out and ski in that first snow and whatever. If the town hasn't been plowing that, it's impossible to know what the demand is for winter access there. I think it's a highly desirable place for people to enter. I know my husband and and family have entered there for years, and I know other people who prefer to go in that way because it's a nice sort of gradual way to start out skiing. The question about where you turn around to park there was the very first thing that struck me when I walked in and was listening to them. I'm wondering if the neighbors nearby are willing to designate their driveways as turnaround driveways so that people can know that's a safe place to turn around. It's always been one of my questions and considerations, given that the parking's on the one side of the street. For most of the town of Concord, we're approaching from the west, and the only way to get there is to do a U-turn somewhere, which has got to be less safe than turning into and turning out of an entrance to a parking lot. Another point was made about the illegal activity. Clearly, there has been no parking lot, and the illegal activity has occurred in the past, so that's something that has to be addressed, whether or not there's a parking lot. That shouldn't be tied to if there's a parking lot, there's going to be an illegal activity, because there was illegal activity without a parking lot. Let's see, there was one more thing. The questions about winter, again, I think are a really key thing. One of the things that's, I think, the biggest peak demand is when there is that big snowstorm in the winter. And both here and at Estabrook Woods, it's a problem that needs to be addressed, because I think everyone knows snowbanks are a problem, and I'm not sure how to reallocate the town budget to address it, but this issue has come up repeatedly with respect to access to places like Estabrook Woods. And the last comment is that about bikes. One of the things, when there's street parking, bikes clearly have to pull out around that parking, and I know that's something on Monument Street that's a big issue for people already concerned about the bikes and car interference. And if the cars can be further pushed off the street, then I'm all for that. But as it stands right now, I think it is a hazard both for the people getting out of the cars and for the bikes that this is what we're designating as where people are supposed to park.
Okay, thank you. Well, if we can't get to the
I wanted to answer one of the questions.
Oh, okay, let's just make this quick so that we can.
She was asking about, would the neighbors agree to turn around?
Mm-hmm.
So the north easement is a secondary driveway to our house, and I have indicated to anyone that we have no problem with there being anybody turning around in that space. And just on the point of the three-point turn, Nora touched on it, but the engineer was absolutely convinced and was willing to certify to the fact that he saw no safety issue with doing three-point turns in one of those easements. And if the selectmen needed that to be incorporated in the report that he generated for us, he has indicated that he would attest to that.
Okay, thank you. All right, Rich, I know that you're in the wings here, and I thought I saw Bill. Yep, and I also saw the chief, I think. Still here. Just wanted to invite town staff.
He's here, or?
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, does that work now? Is that working?
Is that working now? I don't.
We haven't had any luck.
We haven't had any luck tonight.
So any specific questions you'd like us to address, or?
Well, I would want to get some of your thoughts and any questions that you have, because we've all just seen the presentation, which I appreciate, and there's a lot of work that's gone into it, and, but this is your area of expertise,
So it was
certainly not
helpful.
mine.
We were asked to come forward with a technical analysis of the current situation, which we provided a memo in August to you folks, and we also developed a cost estimate about $89,000. Our wall costs are a little bit more expensive than yours, Peter. We take into account the retaining wall aspect of this, as well as we bid these jobs. We have prevailing wage, we have bonds, insurances, and those sorts of things that we include in that cost. But the analysis that we developed indicated that we can have 4 cars parked in that first section
Between the 2 easements?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we revised that after we ground truthed that maybe a week or so ago, and so we could probably fit 6 cars in there. I think the reason that we have less is because of similar to what the former speaker had just indicated, the haphazard nature of parking when it is not delineated does not allow for that perfect, front to back parking, and people will drive in at speed, and then the parallel parking maneuver becomes a little bit more difficult also at that point. Just a point on plowing that area, snow removal. I'll have to confirm now for a 3rd time with my folks as far as what their plowing operations on Punkatasset is, but I'm pretty confident that prior to or after Lansing Old gave up plowing of that area, we actually have a route truck in that area that does wing out that parking area on a deliberate basis. So our first priority, as you say, is the plowing of the roadways, the sidewalks, the emergency response. But in that particular area, for a conservation property, we actually do wing that out and provide shoulder parking for cars. As it was also pointed out, over time that builds up when you have large drifts and you continue to push it out, but there are impediments there that prevent us from doing the job that a loader would be able to do, and we do not send a loader up there. Couple other things I have heard in our quotation. We have, let me pull my reading glasses out for this. In our budget estimate, we actually have the shoulder being widened to a much larger extent. I believe that the previous speaker indicated a 7-foot wide shoulder. We didn't believe that that was adequate. We believe a shoulder width bare minimum of 8 feet would be necessary. We would much rather see a 10-foot shoulder in that area, even better if we had a wider shoulder that would provide some type of a walking way for people on the inside that would be able to walk their children, themselves, and their dogs to that area. So that was one difference. There was a requirement for the removal of existing public shade trees. The public shade trees in that area, we just recently did a town-wide evaluation and inspection of all our public shade trees. There's several large legacy white oaks in that area that are not planned for removal. They're in good condition. And they call for a pruning of those trees in that area, no removals. The other things that we need to take into account is the protection of the existing utilities. It sounds easy, but there might be some relocations of that are also necessary, as well as potentially utility poles. There's an electrical cabinet, gas gate, as well as, I mentioned the utility poles and signage. And I think those are the high points that I wanted to just mention. We did get speed data, along with, you saw a slide that showed the count data of about 3,375 cars per average daily traffic on that. We also found that the speed data, if I remember correctly, the 85th percentile was just over 37 or 38 miles per hour, and the average speed was 33 miles an hour. So we don't see a speed issue there, and we would not target that area for any type of traffic calming on an arterial or a major collector such as that. Did I miss anything?
So is it your opinion that on-street parking is feasible?
I think it would be feasible with the improvements that we've noted, and I think that the 14-car configuration, I think it's overly optimistic. I don't think people park like that, and with the additional cars beyond the 6 that we've noted, there would be significant construction cost. Like I said, our cost estimate is somewhere in the $89,000 range for the 6-car configuration. I think if we were to do the 14-car configuration, there's considerable more site work, there's wall relocation, tree removal, there's some significant grades. I think there's one shot in a picture that was forwarded in that area that might have been around car 8 or 9. And the grades are steep there. They would have to be cut down, and that would cut right into the roots of one of those white oaks that would probably not survive. So we think that the cost would be much more expensive for the 14-car configuration, probably upwards. And these are just planning level budgets. We really don't even like to put these numbers out on the table until we get good survey. We understand, we do some test pits, we understand what the materials are. These are numbers that are really at the concept level, which is always dangerous, but I think it's somewhere around $200,000 if we were to do the full 14.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question. So just make sure I understood, not to the last number that you just mentioned, but for the 89,000, that's for improvements between the 2 easements, correct?
That's correct, for the 6-car configuration
Right.
that we noted.
Okay, and they have in their drawing 7 cars in there, right? I think.
Where they have 2, I think at the first area we
They have
have
2.
1, and then we have 4, and then we have 1, right.
So I just wonder, is the 89,000 to also widen
Be widening the
to
shoulder.
a minimum of 8 feet?
We would like to go further than that, probably closer to 10 feet, and we would have to relocate the wall. We would
I get it.
all those types of
But it
things.
did include moving the wall and widening the,
Right.
That's correct, and putting all the necessary materials in place, compacting it.
and the same with your $200,000 estimate, again, not holding you to that.
That's correct.
I get it, but it would, it's an all-up estimate, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks.
The street parking, you mentioned something about public utilities, problems with that. Is that an ongoing problem, or is that more of a speculative issue?
No, that is an issue, just like in any construction project that we would do. We would look at any existing utilities and the need to relocate them based on the plan. And in this case, there would be
I
either
guess
some
my
reinforcement.
question is sort of how broken are we? Do we really need a fix, or do we need an adjustment and sort of correction in some areas?
It would be an adjustment in some cases. It depends what the final plan looks like, Select Board member. It all depends on how wide that shoulder is, where the parking locations are, and we could work around some of these things, but others, I think, are necessary to relocate.
So kind of a worst case, I'm just making it up, so an adjustment, on the other hand, you might have to move a pole.
Move a pole, move an electrical cabinet, a transformer, those types of things, and those get expensive.
Okay.
And our line painting cost, that's one thing I think we did better on. We get about 7 to 8 cents a foot.
We'll take that. We'll take that. Excellent. Thank you,
Okay,
Rich.
thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Okay. Chief?
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Select Board. My name is Joseph O'Connor. I'm Chief of Police. Here to answer your questions.
Well, it seems that safety would be the big word that I have for you in terms of what you've just heard, and would love to get your thoughts on the plan, which I think would start with, I think it's not broken. We've got a strong safety record here, and I want to get your sense on if we put the 14 cars or if we just did something in the middle, what's your sense?
Just a comment on what I heard and the picture I saw, and the data we've been going back and forth. Jody Geary, clerk in the police department, sharing some data, and I do think she shared some data today and showed a picture of one of the accidents, which had a vehicle actually on the wall in 2008. But that being said, I don't disagree that we have not seen a large number of accidents there. The picture showing the way the cars are parked there, very rarely have I seen people park as orderly as can be. Kathy mentioned a couple minutes ago about bicycles. That's something that really concerns me. That area is highly used most of the year by bicyclists. If the cars are very close to the roadway, and in most cases, a lot of the cars have some part of their wheels on the roadway, there is a potential always for someone to open a door, hit a bicyclist, or pull out, or so forth. So in the current configuration, as is right now, without any improvements, I don't think it is a very safe area. That being said, the data may not support that, but when I stand out in that roadway and watch the cars come down and their front ends start to dip when they see me standing there in uniform, people can move through that area, particularly when people are getting in and out of cars, particularly with dogs or in the winter months if they're snowshoeing or what have you.
The U-turn issue was raised a couple of times. Has that ever come to the attention of the police as being a major problem there?
Well, again, we've heard that there are U-turns being made, but if you go out on that roadway and you take a look, it's not the place to be. I wouldn't make a U-turn there. Even putting the blue lights on is not the optimum place to do it. Having some type of turnaround would be certainly a better way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have questions?
Well, I want to pose the question as bluntly as I can. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. So the presentation, perfectly good presentation, said, look, this is a safe area. There haven't been accidents there. It's safe. Is that the way we should look at it?
In the current configuration, in my opinion, I don't think it's safe.
It's probably not the only area in Concord that you would say that about.
Agreed.
Yeah. We can name them.
I'm actually more afraid of my bike going down Main Street than I am on Monument Street.
Well, just to speak quickly to Main Street, after some of those hearings, we did put officers out there with radar, and we did not see the big, the anecdotal observations that people were making about speed did not match what our officers were observing.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. All right. Do we have any more questions or comments amongst this group, or should we turn it over to the public? Yeah, come on. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is now a public comment.
Yeah,
here.
this is officially public comment.
So you're a public.
I'm a public, as well as a member of the committee. So Nora Murphy, 873 Monument Street. I don't know if Erin is still here. I guess she's closed down the computer with the presentation.
Wait, she's back there.
No, she's right there.
Is there a way I could pull up one of the slides, please? I just, in hearing what Rich had to say, and also Chief O'Connor, I just wanted to respond a little bit based on our work. Is the clicker?
Here it goes.
Oh, not that one. Oh, how do I set it to presentation mode? Thank you. Thinking of the discussion of moving the stone wall and the cost that Rich had mentioned, which seemed much greater than the estimates that we came up with. One of the things I forgot to mention in showing you these pictures is that if you take a look at the parked cars, you'll also notice, if you look closely, that there is a white dotted line over on the left-hand side of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Ward, my husband, laid out some white tape to mark where a potential travel lane should be. However, at the time we were doing this, we didn't have time to consult with the engineer. So I quickly looked up online and I saw that the travel lanes ranged from 11 to 12 feet. So we chose to measure out conservatively. We measured from the double yellow on the north side to those lines 12 feet. Thank you, Ward. This would be perfect for you to come up and help. In truth, if you added a white travel lane simply to the road as it exists,
Right.
It's measured 12 feet from here to this. this side of the yellow line, not to the center of the road.
And what's that distance?
And so it's 12 feet. So if the town decided not, say, to even move the double yellow, but simply to add an 11-foot travel lane, we would be measuring it from in the middle of the double yellow, which would give us probably 6 more inches, plus imagine 1.5 feet away from those parked cars. Imagine a white travel edge line along there. And you'll see how much space you gain simply by adding that travel lane. And I mention it because as a taxpayer, I'm thinking of cost benefit here. And it seems like there are a number of people in the room, including Chief O'Connor, who despite the data that shows that there have been no major accidents here in the last 15 years, feels like it's an unsafe place, which in truth, I know that Kathy said it's strange to start a presentation saying that I'm glad that people feel unsafe here, but it causes people to behave in ways that makes it safe. So parking along the street has some risks associated with it, but because people recognize those risks, they choose to be safe. And that's what we're seeing here, which is why there are no major accidents in the last 15 years. But I want to point out to the town that it sounds like for an extremely inexpensive price of, what was that, 7 to 8 cents per foot, we could add white lines and gain a lot of space. And in truth, because the double yellow is not centered, we could actually move that a little bit and gain the same space you would gain from moving the whole stone wall by moving that line. Much cheaper. Just to mull over.
Yep, good.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So I have one further question of the chief, if I might. It was raised that the off-street was potential for illegal and disruptive activity that is not visible from the road. Would you comment on that? Do you have any concerns about that issue?
Well, we're talking about a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay. The only other location that might be comparable off the road would be Robinson's Well off Sudbury Road, where we don't have problems. The reality in our community is we are not a high-crime community. Some of the characterizations of we had in discussions of what I said about patrols and so forth, I don't remember those conversations the same way. To talk about cameras when that came up in the area, what I said was I think that's a bigger discussion because I think there are privacy issues and so forth. The residents in our town, I don't believe, want cameras to entrances of
Thank you. I just thought that's an issue that needed to be addressed. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ward?
Ward Cheney, 873 Monument. And I'd like to offer a lot of thanks to the police department for providing us, and me in particular, the accident data. And Jody Geary did a lot of that work, and she provided some additional material today that I did not know exists, but apparently each accident has a narrative written up that better explains what actually happens than the kind of data that you can download from the Department of Transportation database. And I think it would be really helpful to have people like the chief and others who are concerned with traffic to look into those more deeply and see what were the cause of the accidents. Like the car that veered off the road was one of the things I got today. It was traveling at a high rate of speed around the corner, heading northeast, in other words, away from Concord, and lost control of its vehicle and went across the road and hit the stone wall, grazing a car that was parked there. So there's a lot of information in that could be helpful to the select board as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
Peter Gifford, 1171 Monument Street. It may be interesting to look back at the history. I don't even know how many of the board members remember this, but when the land transferred from the Hutchins family to the town of Concord in the early 70s, there used to be a cabin way down by the pond. One of the very first orders of business that the town did was take it down. For what reason? Liability and safety. And that's the concern about the inboard parking lot drug deals, illicit behavior, and whatnot. And that's why they took the cabin down, because it was a real potential problem.
There's also a parking lot back there, wasn't there? No?
Not back there.
Well-
There was a horse dress up.
Ha, they don't count, right?
Candace Nelson, 321 Hayward Mill Road. I was over Thanksgiving weekend, I conducted my own unplanned demand study at Punkatasset, having had the opportunity, completely au hasard, to drive by 3 different times on 3 different days over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and each time I drove by, I noted that all the parking spaces were filled. So I'm going to argue that our consideration of demand for parking spaces should accommodate and take into account those peak periods. Clearly, a holiday weekend is one of those. The first snowfall, the big snowfalls, those are other ones. I don't know why we wouldn't want to plan our parking to accommodate demand at those times. Those are the times when access to the woods is particularly precious. I also really appreciated the town officials who questioned the 14-space allocation of parking along this road because of the haphazard parking and because of various obstacles, et cetera. So if, for any reason, cost or otherwise, the town were to decide to only improve that parking for 6 spaces, I would advocate for the parking lot and/or to go back to Estabrook Woods and increase the number of parking spaces there. Because as we shrink the parking and at access points to Estabrook Woods, the poor schmucks like me who have to drive to either one of those places are out of luck, and that's not really fair.
Thank you.
Hi, Abby White, 851 Monument Street. I am part of the Punkatasset study group in that I agree with my husband and I, Tim, who's sitting over here, and abut this, have a greater interest, being landowners that abut all of this, so there's a larger interest for us, but we also support the group. But I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my husband and our family. We have 3 kids. We've gone all through this before, for those of you that have been with us at other meetings. What I heard, Tom, what I heard you say, and I don't know if you meant this in list of priority, but I heard you say safety, cost, access. And those would be, if that was ordered by priority or just the way that you spoke them, I would say those to me seem like logical priorities. It seems like we keep bumping up against this idea that 6 spaces fits and 14 doesn't. And so the logic is that let's try 6 spaces. It needs to be cleaned up. The residents that use it and those of us that live there want to see it safe. So let's try that. Why are we trying to clean up to 6 spaces to what really should have been done a while ago, but it's being held up by this unknown at a completely other part of town, and it's affecting our neighborhood greatly, and it's causing a lot of stress, I will tell you, daily, that we'd like to quell and go back to our normal lives. Thank you.
Abby, while you're up with the mic, I did have one question for you, because you are right at that sort of convergence of whether it's parking, wherever the parking is, and accessing the woods in Estabrook. Are you comfortable with cars parking right, I mean, you're the one that has them right in your line of sight, right in front of your house and along those sides. I mean, do you find that as an impact, or you're comfortable with that as a solution?
It's certainly an impact, but if we weigh all the options, we are completely against a parking lot 500, 400 yards in the woods behind our house because of the greater safety concerns and feeling it's not going to just get used 7 to 7. We've already seen that it overflows into other times of day, and that concerns us.
Punkatasset overflows already.
The use of Punkatasset is at night. There are people with headlamps going back, and it concerns us for a lot of reasons. There was a history of use of illicit use of the woods coming in from Carlisle as well as Punkatasset over the years. This was years ago, so maybe it wasn't part of the record that was brought up. But when people aren't seen, what we find is because the area isn't policed regularly, because it's kind of left to be its own thing, and I don't fault the police for that, but we have asked for it to be watched a little more closely, because when people aren't watched and when there's not a lot of rules, it sounds lovely, but it doesn't really work. So we'd like to have it a little more organized, and with that, I think it could work. And I'll, you know, we greet the people that park there. I'm there at the bus stop all the time. It's, you know, it's a happy place to come, so we'd like it to go back to being a happy place to come.
I want to make sure you felt safe with people right there, because...
Where they can be seen, and I'm not policing that, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Crounce, 49 Indian Pipe Lane. I am not an abutter. I'm a user of the woods. I ride my bike up this hill and down this hill. I run by here. I've taken my kids here for 17 years, either accessing the woods here or at Estabrook. There's been one time in the 17 years when we couldn't find a parking spot and we went to Great Brook, which is a nice place too. I'm very safety conscious. Officer Shelley knows me due to my concerns about parking or crossing to the middle schools, but that's a different topic for a different day. But I mention that only because we've never had a safety issue here at all, and we do a three-point turn to turn and we park. And again, I ride my bike by here, and just because I really think because of the curves coming into it, ends up being a very tame area. I've had no problems parking here. I think it could be improved, widened further, and I think even we've talked about chaotic parking. I know you can't put stripes on the dirt part, but I think you could mark spaces to maximize this scarce utility. My only other comment is that when I think of decisions that the town does or any entity does, you have to think about what's the level of undo. How hard is it to undo this choice? I think if you put a parking lot in the woods, the undo on that's pretty big. If you try and improve this and it gets too expensive or it doesn't work or doesn't get the capacity you need, the undo on that is very small, and then you can consider other options. So for me, the logical thing to do would be to further explore improving, maybe getting more than 6. I think you can get more than 6 there. And if that doesn't work, then maybe consider other options in the future. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Jeff Young, 264 Bedford Street. I'm also a user. I'm not an abuser, but I think the criminal illicit activity argument, it's hypothetical, and like Chief O'Connor said, that it's not something this town generally has to deal with. We have October Farm. There's a parking lot at the end of a long road there. It's very isolated. I don't know if there's been any incidents over there. Madison Field, there's a parking lot that's in a residential area. It's accessible. But I'm glad to see some work is being done in this. I've been using it for years. I do feel like my life is in danger. Maybe it's because I have a wider car, but every time I get in and out of there with my dog or my skis, I'm moving fast, and my dog doesn't always jump right in the car. So, and I park tight to that stone wall, and my wheels are still partly in the road. So it's a tight spot. I don't care where you paint those lines. And with the bikers in the summer, I've been cursed at, trying to get in there, turn around, but it almost feels like this is a Band-Aid for this situation. A parking lot, it's a solution. I realize it comes with its other, negative aspects, but I don't think it's going to be it's going to invite all sorts of this illicit activity. So, and I just feel like as a recreational user of this, that we're not being, we should be accommodated. If it was a soccer field for the kids, you'd probably be building a paved lot with lights and what have you, but it's, adults using it for skiing or for dog walking, and we're jeopardized every time we get in and out of our cars there. So it kind of doesn't really feel welcoming, not really a good solution.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks. Ellie?
Ellie Bemis, 858 Monument Street, right over there. And I have lived here all my life, and I think the safety issue seems to be the biggest thing in everyone's mind. And the fact is that Punkatasset has had waves of not great activity. There's something about the seclusion of it, that just invites that. There was the nude swimming in the 60s, Alice knows.
I am aware of the practice.
Thanks for coming, Ellie.
Yeah, all right.
Hold on a second.
Heard here tonight.
You did mention something at another public meeting, didn't you? Anyway. That got announced on Cambridge radio stations, and it was a big issue. It brought all kinds of things with it. Then there was, a rest stop out on Route 3 where there was sort of illicit sex going on, and that got shut down, and it moved to Punkatasset. And I think there's a very real danger. That's my main thing of having a parking lot that's not visible. I think it's going to invite all kinds of things, and neighbors nearby have found people lighting fires and stuff. So I feel it could really jeopardize the woods as a whole. And I don't see any reason not to try some of these simple measures. And I think if it came to moving the stone wall back, there could be a really nice, inviting path that kind of wound in and out of the trees on the other side of the cars and would make the whole place very welcoming.
Thank you.
Joe Rosato, 873R Monument Street. I'd just like to say, too, that I don't personally feel a great sense of danger from any Concord resident that comes and visits us there, but unless they're doing something illegal. But the concern is that, I'll say this first. So my wife and I have young children. We walk back in the woods as well, and we noticed that there are illegal shelters built. I mentioned this in my list here, at campfires, things that go on illegally that could present a threat, not just to us, but to other people in the woods. And the combination of inviting people into that area without the monitoring, particularly, sorry, this was my point, particularly in this day and age with social media and the internet, we want to be a welcoming town, but we can't really control who comes in outside of Concord residents. And we want to be welcoming, but if that's not monitored or controlled in some way, we have no, there's no way to stop, recurrence of some of the behavior that happened in the past, which can happen all the more easily with the way communication operates today. And as someone else said, you can't undo that once it's done, really. It's a much bigger task to take on at that point. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Okay.
Okay. Well, I think we've heard a lot tonight, and this was really a conversation. It wasn't a decision point. I did note at the very beginning that one of the things that I think it was Nora, who's now left, mentioned that, or maybe it was Ward who said if actually, perhaps it was Rich, if these steps were taken and then it was clearly not working, then the neighborhood would embrace a look at other options. And I just want to thank you all. I think that's given the discussion around the woods and access, that's a really refreshing and helpful place to be at Punkatasset, and I really appreciate that. So we'll keep talking about it. I'm sure I know that we want to make sure that Rich and the engineer have a chance to compare apples to apples, since there are a lot of numbers that were thrown out, and I certainly am not going to hold anybody's feet to the fire on any one of these. And since we are talking about spending town funds, regardless of what we do, we got to make sure that we're a little bit clearer on what they are. Does anybody else want to add some thoughts here?
I would only add that I'm very grateful that very often when we have issues before the select board, we hear criticisms of different proposals, and we don't always hear other suggestions as to alternatives. And I think tonight it was a very thoughtful presentation of an alternative, which is very helpful to us in terms of whatever decision we make, because a lot of information was brought forward, and the best decisions are made when we have information. So thank you all.
Ditto.
All right, thank you all.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Favor? Aye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Meeting.